Today we are looking at the DOOGEE BL5500 Lite that I decided to put the case on upside down for some particular reason. I wanted to keep the teardown separate from the main video, only because I wanted to focus on looking at the dual camera setup inside of this, and as well to see the massive 5500mAh battery inside. With my iCheapo toolkit, I can get out my tools to prepare to tear this phone down. I'll need my screwdriver, some prying tools, my sim eject tool, and some tweezers to prepare to be a nimble navigator. Let's get started. Sorry, wrong channel, but I'll still click my fingers anyways. The BL5500 Lite is all in perfect working order since I did my main review, which, if you haven't seen, it's carded at the top, as well as in the description. The main focus, pardon the pun, is taking a look at those dual cameras on the rear and see what their 8MP sub camera actually does. I'll switch the phone off. I can try and pop out the SIM tray, which now appears to be stuck. Changing SIM eject tools eventually worked. With this removed, I can now place it to the side. Since this is a budget device, there aren't any visible screws or a rear glass panel. All we have is this plastic rear cover to pry off. Using my pry tool just near the volume buttons, I can carefully pop out the clips holding down the rear cover to then finally release it from the frame, revealing our internals. The inside of the rear cover has this honeycomb layout, which I have seen on a few cheapo devices before. There's also some contacts around the frame to help with network reception. And the camera housing is made of a bit of aluminium. Taking a look at this massive 5500mAh battery that DOOGEE said was rocking in this phone, this does take majority of the space up inside of this device, of course. We can also see the dual rear cameras situated here, which we will investigate soon. There's 3 screws holding down this metal bracket. Taking off the 2 side screws. The bracket is still held in place by one more screw located under the fingerprint sensor. I can remove the bracket and place it to the side with the rest of the parts. Disconnecting the fingerprint sensor from the motherboard, we can take a quick look at it to see that it's just a regular sensor and there's nothing special about it, so I can place it off to the side. Using a plastic tool, I can disconnect the battery from the motherboard. You can also see that there's a gap between the battery and the frame of the device. This shouldn't be much of an issue because the battery is held down quite well in place by some adhesive, which required a bit of strength to rip out. The adhesive on the back of the battery can be removed easy enough, and I can replace this with some new adhesive. For a 5500mAh battery, it is quite thin, but it's definitely that capacity, so no complaints here. With the battery removed, we can now see a flex cable connecting the subboard to the mainboard, as well as the thin metal frame that reinforces this device from very violent bend tests. There are holes in the frame exposing the back of the LCD on this phone, so I don't think this one is going to get the bend test. Removing a few screws holding down the plastic for the subboard, we can see a few uninteresting things here, such as the Wi-Fi antenna, the extension flex cable, a couple of contacts, the micro USB port, as well as the loudspeaker, which just plonks right back down into place. Since there isn't much to look at, I'll place the plastic back on, put the screws in, and we can move up to the motherboard. There's also this foam piece just above the subboard's plastic cover to make sure that the battery is nice and snug and won't be against any important pieces. The top of the motherboard has 2 screws holding it down in place, but first we'll need to remove the Wi-Fi antenna as well as the display cable. Before I even think about ripping the motherboard out, I have to be careful of the sub keys on the side, which do have some adhesive on the back of them. I can take the 2 screws out and have a quick look at the top clips holding the board down. There's a small plastic piece surrounding the 8MP secondary camera, so I'll have to remove this. However, this happened. The plastic just popped right off the camera, revealing the sensor. So we can just pop that back into place and pretend that never happened. Now I can gently remove these sub keys with a small screwdriver and lift out the motherboard. The subboard flex ribbon is connected underneath the board, so if you think you can just pull the motherboard straight out, you have to remove this first. With everything pretty much removed, we can have a better look at the metal frame. There's no thermal paste for the processor, but considering this is a pretty low powered phone, the metal frame is basically acting as a heatsink for it. With the board free from life support, we can see the SIM and SD card area, the coin style vibration motor, the earpiece, and the front camera, so I'll take this off to have a better look at it. It just snaps off like a cheapo imitation Lego piece from Wish. The camera is a 5 megapixel one and is capable of recording 720p video. This camera does not have OIS or EIS. Clicking this back in, we can also see the main 13 megapixel camera, the front sensors, the headphone jack, and the shielding covering the processor and other important bits. There's some black tape over the top of these ones as well. It's good to see that DOOGEE manufactured this device in December 2019, so it's still under warranty. Glad I kept that warranty card. Coming to the main 13 megapixel camera, this will also come out just like the other camera and does not have any optical image stabilization. It does have EIS though, which did work during my camera test. It also has some codes on it confirming it is the Sony IMX135 that DOOGEE said it had. Now to look at that 8 megapixel sub camera, which on DOOGEE's website really doesn't tell you what it's supposed to do. I assume it's meant to be a depth sensor, but I'll try a few things later on. This inconspicuous piece of tape is just a sticker for the LED flash, so I can stick that back down and move on. And now taking the plastic off the camera for real this time. This may look very brutal, but it's all in the name of science. We can see that there is a sensor in there. Much like the Ucatel C17 Pro, its purpose is still unknown at this point in time. Googling this code on the flex cable comes up that it's actually a VGA camera sensor, which means not an 8 megapixel one as promised. This may not mean much at the moment, so I'll just go ahead and pop our sensor and LED flash back into place. As well as the main camera, this plastic piece will have to stay off as I have a few more things to try on this phone, and this would only get in the way. Placing the board back into the frame, I can reconnect all the flex cables and make sure not to snag the display cable underneath the board, like I did, but I quickly fixed that. I'll also put the battery back in the device and boot it up just to make sure that we didn't kill our friend. All seems fine in that regards, so let's deviate a little bit and try to find out what that sub camera actually does. Both cameras are connected to the phone. The vibration motor sounds a little bit dead at this point in time. But just giving it a slight boop to it on the back fixes that issue. Opening up the camera, we can see it's all still working, and that removable plastic camera lens was just a feature on this phone. So it's good to see it's still working. Okay, jokes aside though, let's try and figure out what that sub camera actually does. Focusing on our disconnected fingerprint sensor shows the camera is still working. Heading into blur mode shows that the software made blur effect with the outer being blurred and the inner being clear is all still working as well. Covering up that second sensor comes up with the warning not to cover the lenses before taking photos. Even with it covered up though, the blur effect is still present as well as focusing. Let's completely ignore that warning and do the opposite of what it says by covering that second camera up with a bit of tape. With the tape over the camera, let's now see if we can focus, zoom in, and of course try the blur effect and see if we get any different results. Except for the persistent warning now showing, nothing changes. The blur effect is still working even with that second camera covered. The effect is slightly glitching out, but it's not doing a true bokeh effect as we all would have expected. Focusing on the fingerprint sensor is still nice and quick, and zooming is all still functioning. Let's now take things a step further. I'll power off the phone and we can try our next experiment. And that's completely removing the secondary camera from the motherboard, just like a little... never mind. I also noticed that there is an unused area for another connection right where the secondary camera connects. Let me know down in the comments if you know what that's used for. We can power up the device and see if we've changed anything. With the secondary camera placed to the side, I can go ahead and open up the camera and see if we get any error warnings. But as you can see, everything seems to still be working. Going back and focusing in on our subject works perfectly fine, as well as the digital zoom. And coming back to the blur effect, the blur option still works as it did before, with focusing and zooming also working in this mode. Which I maxed out to 11 to ensure that the second camera isn't the one doing the processing work behind it all. Trying to think what else I could try, I put HDR on and that seemed fine as well as focusing and zooming. But we definitely know the blur effect is simply software. I have one more thing to try to see if we can get that second camera to function at all, and that is to remove the main camera, and then set that off to the side, and then just simply plop the second camera back into place and see if we've activated any hidden features. Now with that main camera gone, let's see what the camera does now. Is it going to open at all? Is it going to throw a warning at me? Who knows, honestly? Well, you will know in about 15 seconds. The camera does still open, but it's only showing the front camera, which I sort of expected actually. Trying to change the back camera won't work, and trying some gesture inputs still didn't do anything. The blur option is available on the front camera by default, so that says the weirdo bokeh effect is completely software. I tried removing the second camera while the camera app is still open, and that didn't do anything, and reopening the app also didn't change anything either. The one thing removing the main camera did was enable 1080p for the front camera, but when you try and record it, it comes up with an error saying that the camera is already in use. I tried open camera to see if I could record in 1080p on the front camera, and that didn't work. Still didn't solve the mystery of the secondary camera though, so I guess the investigation has to come to an end. With the code on the flex cable, we know it's a VGA sensor, but what exactly does it do? If you have any idea of what's going on, let me know down in the comments. And with all that being said, I can now put this DOOGEE back together. I can place that bit of plastic back over that second camera, put the 2 screws in to secure the motherboard, align the fingerprint sensor back into place. I can take that metal bracket and put the 3 screws back in, 2 at the side and 1 in the middle underneath the sensor. Just pressing down against the fingerprint sensor to make sure that it is all stuck down in place. Placing the rear cover back on is easy enough. Simply just drop it down on the back and align it with the camera bump and sensors, and just click along the edges until you hear all the snaps snap. And that didn't sound painful at all. Putting the SIM tray back in, I'll go ahead and power up Mr. DOOGEE and check to see if he survived, and it seems like he lives another day. Checking the face unlock and fingerprint all still works, and jumping into camera proves that nobody was ever inside this device and messed around with it at all. Blur effect is working as it should be, I guess. I guess we could all jump on the boat of false advertising here, but DOOGEE doesn't really specifically state what the second camera does. All they say is that it's an 8MP sub camera. The code on it does say otherwise, but look at the bigger picture. The phone is a budget device, and if it's on sale, it's not half bad. If DOOGEE wants to contact me to clarify what that second sensor does, I'd love to chat with them, as their brand doesn't seem too bad. I'd love to check out any other DOOGEE phones in the future, and maybe I will, but I'll thank Gearbest once again for sending this unit my way. Come hang out with me on Instagram and Twitter, and thanks a ton for watching. I'll see you around. I am so sorry, I tried making a tribute to Jerry Rig Everything. I had fun making this though. It was good. Let me know what you thought of this down in the comments. Thanks everyone, be good people, and I'll see you in the next one. If you like this content, feel free to leave a like or a dislike if you didn't. Thanks heaps for watching, and I'll catch you all in the next video.